He picked cities the way a leech picks skin, warm, slow, and inattentive. I know this because I watched him long before he knew I had a name. While other killers lived like sudden storms, he preferred the temperament of weather, ordinary, continuous, and lethal. Years blur when danger moves at a walking pace. That was his genius. He learned to pass for background. When Silas Ward was a boy, he discovered that silence could take the shape of a person. He learned it watching his mother smoke by the sink in a kitchen the color of old teeth. She didn't look at him unless he broke the tableau, a dropped cup, a question that asked for a future. He cultivated this, empty hands, small steps, breath held until the moment dissolved. A boy like that grows into the kind of man you forget in the room. He learned that the one who volunteers to stack the chairs, to take out the garbage, to lock up last, collects keys without ever being handed them. He carried that talent into adolescence like a secret blade. His first act, he did not call it a kill yet, was a stray dog behind the baseball diamond, where floodlights made every breath look guilty. He was precise and apologetic, and after it was done, he waited to see if the world would notice. It didn't. There was no thunder, no police radio calling to the sky. Just a long chorus of crickets and a boy's heartbeat settling into the rhythm of the summer. He told himself, then, that the moral universe had multiple choice and he had simply bubbled in an answer no one would grade. His adulthood became a study in plausible tasks. He was the night custodian, the maintenance contractor, the freelance copier repairman with a badge that scanned green and a smile that landed somewhere short of memory. He took no trophies. He wrote no letters. The dead were not messages. They were rehearsals for a life in which he alone determined when a light went out. He learned the geography of thresholds. Stairwells that normal people considered safe, loading docks that felt like extra hallways, service elevators that briefly put you between floors and outside of time. He avoided what he called narrative invitations. No couples quarrels. No slighted exes. No neighbors with barking disputes. He preferred the anonymous, the late shift cashier, the grad student with headphones, the nurse who parked 2 blocks farther for cheaper rates. He learned the choreography of approach, not from the front where faces live, not from behind where instinct pricks up, but at an oblique angle, like a thought you believe you had yourself. Cities changed around him, new cameras, better locks, busier phones ringing with location pings. He adapted, never faster than the world but never slower. He read safety blogs the way a fisherman checks the weather report. He knew the language of caution and wore it like a second coat. He took a self-defense class once, learned how people were taught to scream, how their heels were coached to pivot. The instructor said, "If you ever need this, your body will remember." He agreed, silently. He counted on it. There is a danger to success. It is not arrogance, he never had the glossy bravado that makes men visible. It is curvature, the way a long unbroken line bends imperceptibly toward belief. After decades, his avoidance of narrative became a narrative of its own. He was the quiet constant, the rumor with no headline, the man who crossed 1,000,000 thresholds and never tripped an alarm. He told himself the world was treacle, that the right pressure could always be applied with a spoon. He had a few rules that looked like principles. He never hunted where he slept. He never lingered to look back. He never improvised more than one step at a time. He never, under any circumstance, targeted anyone who looked like they would be missed immediately by many. He reasoned that grief is loud at first, then quiet, and he preferred to begin with quiet. It would be flattering to claim I sensed him the way prey hears a twig crack. That would give me animal dignity I did not own then. I encountered him the way everyone else did, as a perimeter smudge, a shadow that meant nothing. The night he first drew close to me, I was not thinking about death or men or the architecture of danger. I was turning a key in the side door of my building, 2 tote bags cutting into my wrists, thinking about pepper, onions, the mundane alchemy of dinner after too long a day. Later, when I'd diagram his movements on paper, little arrows for steps, tick marks for pauses, I would see the elegance of his approach. The service alley. The slow pace that matched mine so the difference would not signal. The decision to cough once, softly, as if embarrassed to share the corridor. The bare polite evening, pitched at a frequency that invites no reply. He was 3 strides away when a bottle shattered out on the street. A fight, a laugh too sharp, boots on concrete. The door opened as I turned, and in that fraction he had to choose, push me forward or let the door close. He let it close. He chose patience. I chose unknowingly to survive for one more day. There are moments you only understand when you watch them replay on the inside of your eyelids for months. He gave himself away not with a mistake, but with his perfection. The next night, I came back later and tried the same door. He was there again, not close, but present, a smudge at the edge of the frame. On the third night, he was present in absence. The alley felt evacuated, intentional. I do not pretend to have intuition. I have data. And the pattern was wrong in a way that felt like someone had rearranged the furniture in the dark. So I began to look for him. Not obviously. Not with flinches or keys between my fingers. I learned to walk with a second pair of eyes in the back of my thoughts. I noted service exits, side streets, where the city forgot to perform. The quiet had shape. And inside it, I found him again. His entire life he had counted on a theorem. The world does not tell stories about the maintenance man. He had counted correctly, until he arrived at someone who returned stories for a living, who knew how plots are braided into daily errands. He had targeted hundreds who didn't notice the invisible choreography around them. Then he selected me. He had no way to know that my sister's absence still made a place at the table. He had no way to know that grief taught me more about thresholds than any tutorial online. He had no way to know that I had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for a shape like him. He turned his head one night to check the mouth of the alley, and I saw his face plainly for the first time. That is when his life of weather began to fail him. Weather can be predicted. Lines can be bent. Once you see form, you can set your own geometry. I followed him from outside the story, until it became mine. He had been killing, successfully, his whole life. And then he met a narrator. I do not claim heroism. Only attention. And I promise you this, attention, properly applied, is the beginning of the hunt. The night he finally chose me, I let him. Not because I wanted to be brave, but because there is a current that runs through fear. If you swim with it long enough, you learn where it curls around rocks, where pockets of still water gather, where a hand can find a hold. He had shadowed me long enough for me to measure his pace and learn his angles. If you've never been hunted, understand, your body keeps a ledger your mind pretends not to see. It was time to take inventory. He waited until Tuesday, when the street outside my building grew soft with fog and the deli owner across the way sweated grease onto the sidewalk, cursing the fryer that never listened. Tuesdays are for errands people avoid on weekends. The city's attention drifts. He kept 30 paces between us along the avenue, closing the gap in increments only a metronome would notice. He adjusted his reflection in dark windows the way one tunes a low string. Near the florist where the buckets of stems preened in their water, he crossed diagonally and took the outer edge, a move that would put me between him and the buildings, which are always less observed than the street. He was a master of social obligations. He knew how not to pull at them. No sudden hurry. No stumble into me. If he brushed my sleeve, it would be the way strangers do, apologetic, surprised, forgettable. Near the bus stop, a teen laughed into a phone and wheeled away, sketching noise into the air. He used the laugh as a screen and closed to 10 paces. I stopped at the corner and, on purpose, fumbled with my bag strap. An overfull tote announces many things: harmlessness, distraction, a life too stuffed to be alert. He loved that signal. I crossed mid-block, careless. He followed. That's when I saw it. His right shoulder dipped, an old injury perhaps, or a habit from the way he trained his arms for work. In another life he might have been a carpenter, someone who moves things so other people can live well. In this life, he was the reverse. He wanted a doorway. He wanted an in-between space where decision time grows viscous. I gave him what he wanted, the recessed entry of a closed thrift store. I stepped under the little awning with its peeling paint, and for a breath there were only the two of us in a frame of dead clock faces in the window. He said softly, "Ma'am," a word that let me hear the rehearsal behind it. "Do you know the time?" he asked. It was the oldest trick, manufacture a minor need that requires looking away. But when I looked at my phone, it was not to check the clock. I opened the camera and let the screen light my face, his face, the frame. People will glance when a camera lifts. People will remember a luminous rectangle even if they won't remember a woman's cheekbone. The bus pulled up in a blast of warm air that smelled like wool and impatience. Heads turned, and in that tiny theater, he hesitated. I smiled without brightness. 7:20, I said, and gave the crowd the shape of a banal encounter. Then I stepped past him into the flow, letting the space insist the moment was nothing. It is important to tell you that I was shaking. Courage is the choreography of trembling. After that, the hunt didn't begin. It continued. Only now I led. I adjusted my route to places where the city watched, storefronts with cameras, yoga studios with big glass, coffee shops where baristas know the shape of their regulars. He followed as he always had, folded into the ordinary. If you had asked anyone later if they saw a man and a woman walking the same blocks for 3 nights in a row, they would say no. But the corner cameras would have told a different story if anyone had bothered to ask. On Thursday, I took him to the library. Libraries are an education in how people move when they agree to be quiet together. He made his first mistake there, the kind only a man who trusts silence would make. He lingered too close to the reference stacks where the camera angle left a blind spot. Lingering is a posture the body can't hide. He had always avoided narratives, now he accidentally wrote one. A woman shelved a book poorly, noticed him noticing. She moved away. Her body had read something her mind could not footnote. I left a book open at a table and walked to the restroom without my bag. It was a breadcrumb and a dare. He did not take it. He had rules. But I watched him try to decide, and in that labor I saw the hinge of his method. He didn't improvise well when the environment failed to behave. That night I emailed a friend who works 2 floors down from the city's open data team and asked for a favor that resembled journalism, a sweep of camera logs in a 6-block radius for a particular hour, a particular doorway, a man of average height with a right shoulder lower than his left. I wrote it as if I were writing about a pattern of purse snatchings. I leaned on the muscles of an old life. The thing about being a narrator is that people expect you to be looking for a story. They don't always ask why you need the footage. They also don't always give it to you. But I got enough. When I next found him, it was near the river, where the city runs out of architecture and turns to dark water, as if forgetting itself. He loved edges. He enjoyed that people came there to unspool the noise of their days. He moved better along railings than inside crowds. I think he believed the river was his ally. That is another danger of success, you begin to imagine geography as a friend. I stopped at a bench. I let him approach to 20 paces, then 10, then 5. "Hello again," I said to the air, as if greeting the night. He paused, confused by the address with no target. That pause was mine now. "I know about the shoulder," I added, softer. He didn't move. The current in the river made a sound like a long dress dragged over stone. I was not going to confront him in full. Not yet. Predators force the prey to explain, and the explanation becomes its own trap. I wanted him to leave the river uncertain. I wanted him to end his night with a new feeling, the stick of being seen. "Next time," I said, barely louder than the water, choose someone else. It was a lie. I was not giving him next time. But men like him believe in options. He stepped back into shadow, slow, like an animal breaking eye contact without admitting it. After he vanished, I sat until the cold argued with my bones. I did not cry. I wanted to, and not for reasons that make a good speech. I wanted to shed the possibility that I had misread everything and had invited a narrative where there was only a man on an evening walk. So I told myself the thing I tell you now: doubt is the tax on attention. Pay it, and keep your receipts. The next morning, my doorframe told me he had been there, an adjustment to the strike plate, tiny, skillful, the kind a super would make to stop a latch from sticking. He was telling me he could come in if he wanted. He was also telling me he had rules. Both statements can be true until they aren't. He had been killing his whole life by choosing people who didn't belong to stories big enough to fight back. He had chosen me, and I was a story. He had miscalculated the margin. People think the wrong person is someone with a weapon or a badge. Sometimes it's someone with a notebook and a very long memory. Paranoia is a kind of cartography. Once he sensed the map turning against him, he adjusted routes, routines, the cadence of his breath. He swapped jackets between blocks, reversed hats, shaved the no-man's strip where beard meets throat. He stopped showing his shoulder to the city and reshaped his silhouette. But if you have ever watched a river flood, you know that water remembers slopes even when the banks are new. He had carved channels over decades. He could not undo all of them at once. I learned where he bought his coffee. Always from windows, never waiting. Inside, how he disliked places that split lines into ropes. He favored one-way streets because traffic tells you from which direction error will arrive. He stepped around gum on sidewalks as if it were a wager he refused to place. None of these details will help you survive. They will help you see a person like a book you can read out of order. People asked me why I didn't go to the police. Some I told, because their faces made it safe. I had names but no proof. I had footage that looked like routine and a feeling that looked like fiction. More importantly, I had already learned the pace of his attention. If the city announced him too soon, he would go to ground, and the ground would be a town with fewer cameras and more night. I wanted him to answer for all the quiet he'd devoured. For that, I needed to keep the story at my speed. He tried to flip the narrative back. He left evidence of absence. Sudden gaps where he'd always been. A laundromat went unswept on Tuesdays. A church parking lot stayed unwalked at midnight. The lobby of a certain apartment building stopped smelling of industrial lemon on mornings when it used to. You can track a man by the stains he no longer erases. Then one afternoon my sister's birthday arrived the way she used to, without fanfare, full of ordinary kindness. I took a half day and went to her favorite bakery, bought a cake too sweet for adults and sat with it in the park until the sun moved and made me move too. He did not approach. He watched from across the street, reflexively avoiding my grief because it came with an audience. That is how I knew he was unpracticed in facing it. He had chosen victims who were alone at first and quietly missed later. Grief he had never had to see made him clumsy. I called a journalist I trust and told her a story with the center missing. Don't publish, I said. Not yet. Just keep a file. If I send a date, open it. She asked the sensible question. Are you safe? I told her the complicated truth, no. But I am more dangerous than I was. That week, I walked him into a museum. Museums are full of cameras that look at people the way portraits do, flatly, indulgently, without suspicion. They're also full of rooms where you can be alone with a painting while guards check their feet for how much longer their bodies must be quiet. In one such room, I stood before a landscape and pretended to be moved. He drifted to my periphery, hands in his pockets, the posture of a husband bored by the third gallery. We were two people practicing the social ritual of looking. I spoke without moving my mouth much. You chose me, I said, eyes on a tree that had never existed. His answer didn't change the air. "I chose Tuesday," he said, as if that were a defense. "You chose me," I repeated, and the room heard only the hum of climate control and a guard's cough. He did not like being given subject to it. He preferred to be the hand, not the choice. That was useful. Men who prefer toolhood get angry when made visible. Anger makes angles. We left the museum in separate streams and rejoined 1 block later. He broke pattern then, crossed behind me too quickly, eyes touching my back. A bus squealed, a tourist's bag caught on the curb, and for one exposed second he was in the open with his decision. I took his picture. You might think that is the moment when he knew the hunt had truly reversed. It wasn't. Predators have an optimism that survives small catastrophes. He told himself I was a hobbyist, a woman fatigued by true crime podcasts who had decided to audition for danger. He told himself if he simply waited, the story would tire. He told himself the old lie, if I do nothing, time will erase the chalk outline around my shape. So I made the chalk permanent. I printed his photograph on paper too cheap for permanence and taped it to a corkboard in my apartment. Under it I pinned the dates of the city's unsolved quiet. Not the spectacular, not the nightly fireworks of crime, but those small dark stars you only see when your eyes adjust. A nurse walking home in scrubs. A janitor found in a stairwell 3 floors from where he worked. A campus groundskeeper swallowed by the river without a witness. I was not sure which were his. But patterns speak. They speak especially when you are wrong. Error can be instructive if you seed it near what you know. I started to leave traces he would find. A chalk mark at a service door he used. A small wire flag in a planter near an alley. A note tucked under a brick, "Do you understand thresholds?" He had taught me the power of approach. I applied it back. The messages were nonsense to anyone else. To him, they were an index. He responded with an old habit, he called a plumber to my building for a leak that didn't exist. He wanted to see which uniform I opened the door for. I opened for none. He tried a cleaner's flyer slipped under my door, first month free. I brought it to the super, who shook his head and said, "We don't allow solicitation." We were 2 civilians who understood a problem in different dialects. He hated that I refused the scene he set. One night he waited across from my window with the posture of a man waiting for a cab that never comes. I sat behind the glass with the lights off and allowed him to believe he was looking at himself in a mirror dark enough to prefer him. He did not move. Streetlight made a crown of him that he neither wanted nor refused. We stayed like that, neither of us blinking to confess the time. When a siren passed, he set his shoulders and walked away. I waited 10 minutes, then followed. The city at 2 a.m. has a particular stitch, loose, slightly misaligned, a hem undone by fingers too tired. He used that looseness to slip between bars, hotel lobbies where the night clerks learn to look busy, parking garages that smell of rubber and echo. At a university building, he knew the exact door where the security camera had been moved a month ago because the facilities board had bragged about it in a newsletter. He knew more about the city than anyone who loved it. He resented it for making love difficult. At the top of a stairwell, he left me a message, a rag folded into a triangle, placed on the 3rd step. In his world, a folded rag is a signal, work paused, work to resume. I picked it up, folded it back into a square, set it on the sill. In my world, we reset objects to what they were when we first saw them. He would understand that too. I could tell you I wasn't afraid. It would be a lie I have no energy to maintain. Fear became weather in me, as it had in him, a constant pressure defining how doors opened and how shoes were chosen. But alongside fear grew something with more ambition, a calculus. If he had spent a lifetime making sure the city didn't form a narrative around him, I would write one it could not refuse. I would not be the only narrator. When the police finally entered our story, it would be because I had gathered enough for them to do more than frown at the shape of a concern. But not yet. First, I wanted the city to recognize him the way muscle recognizes habit. A raised shoulder here, a breath held there. I wanted strangers to feel the room rearrange when he arrived. That is how you hunt the weather, you teach the landscape to notice rain. He made his first overt strike on a night cut from glass. Winter had done its expensive trick, took the city's palette and turned it to silver and complaint. I left my office with my scarf high and my eyes low. A van idled half a block down, familiar in the way white vans are familiar, like a punctuation mark no one reads aloud. He stepped from behind it with the imprecision of cold fingers. Precision is a summer virtue. I welcomed the season. He approached me the way he liked to approach doors, at an angle, oblique, letting intention arrive 1 second later than the body. "Excuse me," he said, and when I moved to give way, he didn't take it. Predators say excuse me to remind you they can. He wanted the narrow space between the van and the curb, a channel where footsteps make small sounds and time has to pass through single file. He had likely orchestrated this dozen times, a corridor of his own making. He miscalculated my stride. Half pivot, bag raised, knee up, clumsy self-defense practiced in a mirror, yes, but also a broadcast. Not prey. Not today. His hand came up not to grab but to block, a reflex honed by practice. His fingers brushed my wrist and I felt a notch, a scar, near the base of his thumb. The body records its own minutes. I said, quietly, for him alone, Silas. He froze. It was a name he had allowed very few to keep. He had trained his world to treat him as a function, not a person. Night custodians are given shapes, not biographies. Hearing his name in that alley was like hearing your old house bend in a storm and realizing it still knows where you sleep. He stepped back, then forward, angry the way stone becomes angry when water insists on being a river. "You don't want this," he said. "Men hate choices presented to them as exits they did not design." "I want you to stop," I replied, which was a version of the truth that would get us both to the next scene. He almost laughed. The sound made frost of the air. "You think you can stop me," he said, but it wasn't a question. "I think I can turn you into a story," I said. He looked up, a flick of his eyes across the street. I followed the look. 2 cameras, one above the deli, one new above the laundromat. He calculated angles. The van idled like a large animal refusing to be named. That night he left the city. Not literally. But he shifted into its unsupervised organs, the outer borough edges, the industrial squares where signage is in a language made of numbers. He chose terrain where the world treats human bodies like forklift pallets. In those places, a woman following a man looks like a HR video warning others what not to do. I enlisted help I had been saving. A man with a bicycle who understood how to be present and forgettable. He took my place on certain blocks, relaying sketches to me 2 streets over. The trick of hunting is humility. You must accept your shape is not always the one the moment needs. We built a grid. We watched a warehouse whose loading dock ramp let you float between levels of sight. We watched a storage facility that felt like a library for objects no one reads anymore. We watched the hollow under an overpass where heat rises from vents and men roll their nights up like rugs. He moved through each like a maintenance prayer. He looked for me and did not find me. I wanted him hungry. I wanted him to return to the river with a thirst the city could taste. When he came back, he did something I had anticipated and hoped against. He went to the building where my sister used to live. The super had changed twice since the police emptied her apartment. New paint over old offenses, new rules posted in the lobby where nobody reads rules. He stood before the buzzer and touched no button. It is a particular human ache to stand before a door you don't intend to enter. I stood across the street and let the past assemble around us like fog. He didn't know her name. He only knew mine. He was trying to disassemble me. He failed. If harm is a needle, memory can be a thimble. I approached. Not close. Just enough for the street to feel the geometry changing. You're cold, I said. He smiled without teeth. You're wrong. About the weather? About what happens next? He had always avoided narratives. Tonight he wrote one and handed it to me like a dare. Meet me, he said, and named a building that might as well have been designed by his hunger, an old train repair shop now colonized by arts nonprofits and startups that used the word community as a good luck charm. Many doors. Many thresholds. Many backstage corridors that thought they were hallways. No, I said, because the word is useful for refusing choreography. He expected me to say no. He wanted me to refuse. Predators prefer to make you refuse rather than accept, because refusal places the scene on your conscience. I did not owe him the ethics of his next act. But I owed myself control. Tomorrow, I added, giving time to hang like bait. He nodded once. He would prepare. So would I. The repair shop was all winter light and old dust and grant money. We arrived in separate shivers of air. My bicycle friend became a janitor across the street, then a man reading a manual in a parked car. 2 others checked the corners we could not see. This is what the police do when they set a net. Civilians must improvise with fewer strings. Improvisation can be adequate if it is humble. Inside, the building's bones were visible, trusses and catwalks and the ghost of locomotives. Thresholds everywhere. He moved like a man visiting his childhood church. He wanted me on a mezzanine where the sound of a footstep arrives late, where echoes do math. I stayed on the ground. I wanted him where dust keeps the prints of intention. He approached without hurry, hands out, like a man greeting a nervous horse. We can talk, he said. Men who have never been allowed to confess prefer negotiation to confession. It feels like leverage. Talk, I said. I had a small camera clipped inside my coat, a microphone the size of a freckle at my collar. He would not consent to being recorded. I did not ask. Some ethics must bend to shelter others. He told me, in a voice that tried not to be his, that he was not the story I was writing. That the city has many shapes and some of them are worse. He gestured to the catwalks as if other hunters lived up there. Perhaps they do. But they had not chosen me. What did you do with them, I asked, and because my voice learned its trade in rooms like this, it did not break. He didn't answer. He never would, not in full. He was not built for confession, he was built for approach. He stepped closer. Every hunted person who has learned to hunt rehearses a final movement in the mind, a lunge, a swing, a sudden brightness of sound. Mine was a step backward into a circle of chalk I had persuaded a friend to draw earlier that day for a youth theater exercise. Chalk is water-soluble. It is also a border the brain respects. He stopped at its edge. The body, when presented with a child's geometry, falters. I looked up, past him, into the mezzanine. A face appeared there, the security guard we had paid to remember. He lifted his radio. The sound of official language, 10 codes like ritual, entered the air. Silas assessed distance, doors, rails, steps. He was a man built to map, and the map had turned. He ran. Men like him rarely run. The door he chose had been locked an hour prior by a contractor whose hand I had shaken. He pivoted to a stair, my bicycle friend stepped into view, not heroic, simply present. Presence can be a barricade. Silas took the corridor I had left him, the one that led to a room with a single exit and a pane of safety. Glass that made a rectangle of the afternoon. He faced me there, palms up, a mime of surrender that asked the future to be lenient. End it, I said, not a command, but a diagnosis. His weather had finally met a roof. Sirens reached the building and did the private work sirens do, they changed the shape of his possibility. He did not collapse. He simply narrowed. "You won't understand," he said, a last small myth to give himself dimensions. "I don't need to understand," I told him. "I need you to stop being weather." That is the moment he decided he preferred to be a story after all. He lunged for the glass, not to escape, but to break the room's outline, to make the world look like it had always looked to him, fragmented, with gaps he alone could slide through. He failed. Safety glass holds. When the officers reached him, he was panting and silent, rage routed into tiny precise operations in his jaw. He looked at me as if I owed him an ending he liked. I looked back the way one looks at rain, acknowledging, not forgiving. He had spent a life at thresholds. He walked through one he didn't own and found all of us on the other side. Stories do not end where sirens begin. The city prefers neatness, courts prefer tidy arcs. People like me, if we survive, are asked for statements packaged in language palatable to agencies built for order and power. I wrote mine with care. I left out the part where I had waited. I left out the chalk. I left out the feeling that I had become a door and chosen when it would open. He pled to something that resembled a portion of the truth, smaller, neater, distilled by counsel into good odds. People asked if I was satisfied. Satisfaction is not a word grief uses. We use other words, quiet, for instance, and sometimes afternoon, and occasionally broccoli, because eating becomes a sacrament. Life insists. It has to. Otherwise all that remains is the shape he preferred. The in-between that never resolves into home. Reporters wrote pieces with cadences borrowed from cautionary tales. A neighbor remembered him as kind. A coworker, night shift, warehouse, remembered him as particular with the broom. The city discovered it had known him the whole time in small socially approved ways. There is consolation in that, and there is accusation too. We all made a backdrop convenient for his kind of weather. I did not attend his sentencing. I rode a bus that day across a bridge, and I watched the river the way men like him watch souls. The rails hummed a song the city sings only for the distracted. I let myself be sung to. When I reached the far side, I bought an orange. I peeled it in a spiral and thought about domestic acts, how they are thresholds too, little rehearsals for the quiet we earn. Later, when the officers return to the conversations they prefer to have, ones with edges, they asked me questions that tried to make a grid of the thing. How did you know? When did you decide? Why didn't you call us sooner? I gave them answers that would hold in a file. I did not say the thing that guided me, that his success had made an architecture he could no longer exit. He had become a hallway. I had simply walked it to its end. Do you want to know the truth of my advantage? It was not bravery. It was literacy. He was a text the city had been writing in margins. I learned to read the notes. At night I dream of thresholds still, elevators that stop between floors, doors that refuse keys, a corridor that lengthens no matter how fast I walk. Dreams are weather, too, and mine learned his vocabulary. I wake, make coffee, rewrite the sentences my heart wants to tell me about danger. You are not safe, it begins. Then, softer, but you are not alone. None of us are. Others keep watch. Others learn the shape of quiet until they can reach into it and pull a scene into view. Sometimes I pass the old repair shop on purpose. Kids in black leotards rush in with their hair in suitors of bun. A startup with a clean font on frosted glass slides desks around like chess. In the corner of the lobby there is still a faint rectangle where chalk once failed to be art. I see it even if they don't. I don't want it scrubbed away. The world needs a few stubborn outlines that say, something happened here, and we decided not to let it happen again. Silas lives now behind rituals of another kind, counts, checks, forms, a monotony cruel enough to resemble his own. I do not care if he is repentant. Repentance is architecture internal to a man. We needed public scaffolding, the fact of him, named, contained. That, we have. One spring afternoon, a woman stopped me on the street and thanked me without saying for what. People have a way of finding the shape of your story even if they do not know its furniture. She told me her husband walks her to her car now. She told me her daughter keeps her keys in her hand, but not like a weapon, more like a tool she means to use. I told her that sounded like living. We stood in a puddle of sun and shared the ridiculous luxury of a minute unafraid. You want to know if I regret not ending him myself? I am not built for endings out of proportion to my hands. What I did had proportion, attention against erasure, narrative against fog. I refuse him the romance of a final blow. I offer instead the literature of bureaucracy and a long, boring tomorrow he cannot alter. I keep his photograph, the one from the museum, in a drawer. It is printed on cheap paper and will not outlast a spill. That is correct. He will be forgotten properly, by weathering, not by worship. I keep other things more carefully, a note from my sister that says only, bring milk. And adds a smile that looks like a door opening, a list of names from those cases that might have been his and might not, because sometimes the dignity of a story is being included even if the authorship is unclear. A map of the city with certain corridors highlighted, so I can teach the young to avoid places that love thresholds too much. On the anniversary, the real one, the night with the fog and the Delhi friars singing, I visit the river. I do not make offerings. I do not speak to the water. I let the current tell me its endless sentence, forward, forward, forward. I stand and I listen until my ears begin to believe themselves. When people ask me what to do if they feel the quiet isn't quite the right shape, I tell them, become a narrator. Learn names. Measure angles. Teach your feet the grammar of exits and your eyes the courtesy of presence. You will not always be right. Error will be your unruly cousin. Invite it in. Let it sit with you as you underline. He had been successfully killing his whole life because we give the benefit of the doubt to functions, custodians, drivers, men with clipboards. We can keep doing that. Or we can retune the instrument. The benefit of the doubt is not a gift for strangers, it is a treaty we negotiate with the world. Write it more carefully. I do not imagine myself a hero. Heroes like epilogues too much. I am a worker, like him, only my task is inversion, I take the in-between and make it arrive somewhere. And if you must call me anything, call me a door. Not the kind that traps, but the kind that, when opened at the right time, turns weather into a room with a table and chairs and light you can read by. That is what we keep when the hunting ends, rooms we can sit in without rehearsing our deaths. Names we can say aloud without summoning their hands. Streets we can walk and know that, should the quiet pretend to be harmless again, someone somewhere is already bending over it with a pencil, annotating the margin, making a story of it, ready to be read. If he reads this, and men like him are readers of the rooms they tried to own, I want him to know one last thing, you were never the protagonist. You were, at best, a device. The story belonged to the living. It still does. Thank you for watching the Quill's journey. If you're enjoying the atmosphere, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what stood out to you.